My name is Jan Ward. My science partner was Abir Biswas, geology professor from the Evergreen State College. I call my piece Bound, Unbounded. It is a record of my process to learn about Mount St. Helens and Abir's research. It also includes my conversations with this unique children's encyclopedia and the pandemic and political events of 2020. This was one of my first efforts to draw Mount St. Helens. This is where Abir's research is taking place. And of course, he and I were not able to meet in person. So we had 11 Zoom meetings over this last year while the coronavirus came on. During that period of time, I wasn't sure what to do. So I distracted myself with trying to improve my drawing skills. And I played with digital topography maps. I used the research that Abir sent me. It was so informative and such an uplifting story that this is the direction I started to take. But then things continued to happen, and I turned to my humorous side. Sure, I could leave it all behind, like the pandemic, the social and racial unrest, the lies, the danger, the frustration. Sure, I can do that. Right. Sure, I can. So, to gather my thoughts, I learned about mind maps. And so, if you start with a central idea and then you branch out and continue to look at individual areas that are around this central idea, then maybe it can help you formulate a plan. So, this is what I attempted to do at this point. And yet, I felt stymied. I turned to humor again, realizing that I had not gone far enough. I played with earth pigments. And finally, a story started to be revealed. It was a children's story, and it was about the mountain, and I wanted to include the Cowlitz tribe, and yet here's some ranting interfered with these thoughts. And political events that stimulated me in the wrong direction. And towards the end of the book, I used some past artworks and tried to go off into an abstract way. And this shows the one book that demonstrated Abir's research, tiny little one small square, which represented what they do out in the field is using a 1 meter square. And the research is done with inside that square. This page represents Abir's work, I think, in the best way that I was able to. It's the one small square, and it shows how the mercury coming out of the mountain through ash and tephra landed on the trees, and then the litter from the trees what went into the soil. And so he's able to dig down through the soil to where the mountain laid the tephra and ash, and he's able to measure each of these layers in which and measure the amount of mercury in each of those layers. And so, of course, we all know that you dig a hole and it goes to China. So that is a little representation of Abir's research. Abir told me that the new research shows that mercury, which he is researching, not only gets into the cells of the plant, but that it's found in the roots as well. in the end, I found that the children's encyclopedia was full of my notes and research and odd bits, but it wasn't what I considered a real piece of work. And yet I really enjoyed putting it together. Something magical happened with the book. And I think it was about that point that this idea to make a girdle book, an old-fashioned book that you could hang from your belt and carry with you at all times. And so I used the watercolor drawings that I had created during this year-long process, put them in here, and I called it The Power of Nature. This is the Girdle Book. It's made out of leather, and it unfolds to reveal a little tiny book. And the first page has a haiku. More than a rock, I am history, habitat, shield, source of rivers, life, by Samantha Oster. I drew watercolor drawings and tried to show the process of the mountain, of its eruptions. Very dramatic time in 1980. And all the logs that came down with the force of water, burying cars. And then the story changes, and just 30 years later, the soil is rebuilding. Creatures like the spider and the lupin are starting to rebuild the environment. The logs hold new life, and they've traveled downstream, and the new life begins. And mercury is still found there. It's part of the volcanic process, and yet new life is abounding, and the mountain is rebuilding again. I call this little book The Power of Nature. The power of nature, which is the cycle of nature that continues to repeat time and again, just like the COVID pandemic will, just like political unrest will. All these cycles will come into being. And that is my Bound, Unbound book and Girdle Book.